The tension crackled in the air, palpable and impossible to ignore. Whispers of injustice filled the room, the murmur of unchecked power, and rumors of a hard-hitting judge preparing to serve her uncompromising justice. No one suspected that, in a matter of minutes, the entire atmosphere would explode. A pair of officers, notorious for their casual bigotry, dismissed the black woman at the bench. They never imagined they'd chosen the wrong target. Their arrogant contempt would soon turn to fear, as one scandalous act set off a storm no one would ever forget. Judge Jessica Carter woke up before dawn, as she always did. Her morning routine never changed. A quick jog through her neighborhood, a strong cup of coffee, and a few minutes standing by the window to appreciate the rising sun over the Memphis skyline. Though small in stature, barely 5 feet 3 inches, she loomed large in the justice system of Shelby County. Known for her piercing brown eyes, which could intimidate even the most seasoned attorneys, and her unwavering moral compass, Jessica's path to the bench was paved with sleepless nights, endless reading, and relentless ambition. Born and raised in Memphis, Jessica grew up in a community riddled with systemic issues. She had lost friends to police brutality in high school, watched her mother struggle for years as a single parent, and faced the sting of racism more times than she could count. Each slight and setback only made her more determined to seek justice from within. This day, Jessica sensed a certain tension in the air as she settled behind a massive wooden desk in her office. Court clerks scrambled, carrying thick manila folders stuffed with documents. Her docket was full, a mix of petty crimes and more severe cases. But there was one particular hearing that stood out. A civil rights lawsuit against 2 police officers accused of abusing their authority. The defendant's attorney was a junior, someone Jessica didn't know well, and the plaintiff was a local activist who claimed he had been targeted because of his race. As she went through the case briefs, Jessica recognized the names of the officers: Officer Peter Lawson and Officer Ronald Denton. Their reputations preceded them. Though they hadn't been formally disciplined, local whispers told a different story. They were rumored to be men who cut corners, hurled racist slurs, and flexed their badges as tools of intimidation. That they still roamed the streets in uniform was a testament to the complexities of internal affairs investigations. Jessica felt a restless energy tightening in her chest. She knew how these things could go. Bigotry often hid behind a uniform or an official title, only protect itself under layers of red tape. People in her position sometimes looked the other way, some out of fear of retribution, others out of apathy. But Jessica Carter didn't look away. She faced challenges head-on. The tension in the room made her more alert than usual. Today, she would preside over a case that could shake the city's comfort zone. Little did she know, it would also ignite a firestorm that would lead to her own personal confrontation with the same officers who thought themselves untouchable. When Jessica entered courtroom 7B later that morning, it was standing room only. Spectators craned their necks to see her take the bench, their chatter snapping to silence the moment she walked in. Dressed in her traditional black robe, Jessica offered no greeting beyond a curt nod to the bailiff. She carefully took her seat, aware that all eyes were upon her. In the front row, the plaintiff, a local community activist named Rachel Foster, sat stiffly, his hazel eyes darting around, filled with a mixture of determination and lingering fear. At the defendant's table were Officers Lawson and Denton. Jessica studied their expressions carefully. Lawson, tall with a square jaw, wore a perpetually smug look, while Denton, shorter and more compact, flicked his gaze around nervously. Their attorney was nowhere to be seen. Reportedly stuck in traffic, a frazzled young man in a cheap suit rushed into the courtroom. Files spilled from his arms as he tripped on the tile floor, sending papers sliding in all directions. The clerk let out a sigh, and Jessica's eyebrows rose. This, she realized, was the attorney for the defense. "Apologies, Your Honor," the flustered lawyer managed, scrambling for his scattered documents. "I'm Arthur Gable, representing Officers Lawson and Denton." Jessica glanced down at her notes. "Mr. Gable, you're nearly late," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," he repeated, straightening his tie. It was clear he was new. Possibly fresh out of law school, he still had the awkwardness of someone trying to navigate the high-pressure world of a courtroom. Jessica took in the scene before her. The gallery was silent. every person in the room aware of the importance of the moment. The stakes were high, and the city's future seemed to rest on the outcome of this case. She would not be swayed by the young attorney's nerves or by the smugness of the officers at the defendant's table. She had a duty, and she was determined to fulfill it. As she called the case to order, Jessica could feel the weight of the room bearing down on her. She knew that this would be no ordinary day in the courthouse. This would be a day that would make waves across Memphis, a day when the system would be tested in ways it had never been before. And little did she know, it was about to explode into an unforgettable confrontation between those who thought themselves above the law and the judge who refused to look the other way. Law school had hardly prepared him for the tension of a high-profile civil rights case. "Mr. Caldwell," Jessica acknowledged the plaintiff with a nod. "Are you and your attorney prepared to proceed?" James Caldwell's attorney, a composed woman named Veronica Wu, stood and spoke in a measured tone. "Yes, Your Honor, we're ready." Jessica paused, eyeing each person in the courtroom before responding. "Then let's begin." For the next hour, the two sides presented their opening statements. Veronica Wu was concise. She described how Caldwell had been pulled over without cause, verbally abused, and roughly handled despite offering no resistance. She claimed that these officers had a pattern of racially motivated conduct. Gable's opening, however, was a shaky attempt at establishing his clients as strict enforcers of the law. Though he offered no solid evidence to disprove Caldwell's accusations, his defense seemed more like a desperate attempt to paint a picture of professional law enforcement. Through it all, Jessica remained impartial. But beneath her calm exterior, she seethed with familiar indignation. Decades of buried memories of racial profiling, police harassment, and injustice threatened to surface. But she held it all in check, maintaining a firm grip on her emotions. She hammered the gavel lightly. "We'll hear witness testimony next. Court stands in recess for 15 minutes. As Jessica rose from her seat, she noticed Officers Lawson and Denton glaring at her. A flicker of disrespect was evident in their eyes. She paused for a moment, meeting their stare. A whisper of apprehension brushed over her. She could sense something roiling beneath the surface. Something about it burst forth in a way no one in that room could have anticipated. During the recess, Jessica retreated to her chambers, letting the bustle of the courtroom subside. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her momentary reverie. It was her clerk, letting her know that a small group of reporters had gathered in the hallway. The case had apparently caught the attention of the local media, and everyone wanted a statement. But Jessica wasn't interested in courting the press. Her mind drifted to the day she was first sworn in as a judge. She remembered the vow she made to uphold the Constitution, to ensure that justice was served without fear or favor. She had always known she was stepping into a system riddled with flaws. Her identity, a black woman, would invite both admiration and hostility. She had accepted the scrutiny because she believed in the law's potential to protect the vulnerable. Before heading back to the bench, she glanced over the file one more time. Caldwell's complaint included specific references to racial slurs. He alleged that, after being pulled over, Lawson had sneered at him, saying, "People like you don't belong in our neighborhood." It got worse from there. Caldwell's injuries were documented in hospital records, bruises on his wrists, a fractured finger. Jessica could see the stark pattern. She wondered how many others had experienced the same, but never filed a complaint. A light knock on her chamber door broke her train of thought. It was Judge Donovan Mitchell, a senior judge and one of the few individuals Jessica trusted in the courthouse. A tall, silver-haired man who had once been a civil rights attorney in Mississippi. He had a gentle yet firm presence. "You've got a full house out there," he said, stepping into the room. "Media is itching for a headline." Jessica nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I know. This case is bigger than one man's complaint." "Don't I know it?" Donovan sighed. "And you're the one sitting on that bench, Jessica. Be careful. The politics here can get messy." Jessica appreciated concern, but felt no hesitation. "I know, but I have to do what's right." Judge Mitchell offered a small, tight smile. "That's why you wear that robe, and you wear it well. Just keep your eyes open. Lawson and Denton, there have been rumors about them for years. It's possible they're tied to some powerful people. Don't be surprised if they get desperate. When Jessica returned to the bench, the gallery fell silent once again. The witness stand beckoned. The first testimony, and Jessica prepared to guide the proceedings with fairness. Yet deep down, she had a nagging feeling that this trial would be anything but smooth. The tension from the defendant's table was almost palpable. The looks Lawson and Denton cast her way held more than a hint of menace. Whatever was simmering beneath the surface, Jessica was prepared for it. She had no intention of letting fear or intimidation get in the way of the truth. But she was about to find out that sometimes, no matter how fortified one's resolve, a single explosive moment could change everything. The next round of testimony came from Rachel Foster himself. He climbed into the witness box with a carefully measured gait. Once seated, he placed his hands in his lap, visibly trembling. Veronica Wu guided him through his account of the traffic stop. "Tell us what happened in your own words, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell took a steadying breath. "I was driving home after picking up groceries," he began, his voice steady, but betraying an undercurrent of emotion. Jessica listened intently, her eyes never leaving him as he recounted the incident. Each word he spoke felt like another brick in the foundation of his case. As he continued his testimony, the room seemed to hold his collective breath, knowing that the outcome of this case could ripple far beyond this courthouse. It was dusk, the sun had just set, and I noticed flashing lights in my rearview mirror, so I pulled over. Officer Lawson approached my car. I handed him my license and registration. He didn't say why he stopped me. Instead, he asked why I was in this neighborhood. A faint murmur fluttered through the room. Jessica watched Lawson's face. The officer sat with a rigid posture, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and then Wu prompted Caldwell's voice. His words trembled again, but he continued. "I asked if I'd done anything wrong," he said. "He told me to stop playing dumb. Then he asked if I was dealing drugs or if I was casing houses. I told him I lived just a few blocks away, and he didn't believe me. At that point, Officer Denton came over. They said I wasn't cooperating and ordered me out of the car." Caldwell paused, gathering courage. When I asked why, Lawson said something like, "You're lucky we don't take you in for trespassing." He yanked my door open and pulled me out. Denton handcuffed me so tight it felt like my wrists were breaking. They searched me right there on the street, and when I tried to protest, Lawson shoved me against the car, twisting my finger in the process. Wu waited for the courtroom to settle again. What happened next? They ran my ID, found out I had no record. They looked disappointed, then told me to get out of there, that they'd be watching me. I drove myself straight to the hospital. Doctors said my finger was fractured, and I had bruises around my wrists. Silence swept the courtroom. The pain in Caldwell's voice was undeniable. When Gable rose to cross-examine, he fumbled his notes before trying to paint Caldwell as uncooperative. He suggested Caldwell had been argumentative and hinted that the officers suspected him of driving under the influence. However, Gable produced no breathalyzer results, no video footage, not even a record of suspicious driving patterns. Jessica listened intently. She knew well that intimidation tactics often replaced real evidence. As Caldwell stepped down from the stand, Jessica signaled for a short recess. Throughout the testimony, Officers Lawson and Denton had grown visibly impatient, exchanging glances, rolling their eyes. Something about their demeanor made Jessica uneasy. A small voice in her head urged caution. This was not just another civil rights case. Something bigger loomed around the corner. Jessica could see the cracks forming in the fragile facade that had protected these officers for so long, but she never could have predicted just how dramatically that facade would shatter or what dangerous fallout might follow. During the next recess, the courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations. Jessica took a moment to observe the crowd from the bench. Journalists with press badges hovered near the back, scribbling notes. The public benches were occupied by local activists, some in solidarity with Caldwell, and a few spectators who seemed unsure why they were there but sensed the importance of the proceedings. Rachel Foster, despite giving his testimony, remained in the room. He kept glancing at the exit, as if considering whether he should just leave. His expression revealed exhaustion, but also a grim determination. Jessica admired that. Victims of abuse by law enforcement often face the added burden of public scrutiny and personal risk. She knew intimately how that felt, As the bailiff announced a resumption of court, Officers Lawson and Denton moved to stand. Denton had begun to pace slightly while Lawson fiddled with his tie. Jessica had seen plenty of defendants do the same, but it was different seeing it from men wearing official badges of authority. "Call your next witness," she said. Veronica Wu cleared her throat. The plaintiff calls Dr. Amanda Collins to the stand. A middle-aged woman in a crisp blazer stepped forward. She was the ER physician who had treated Caldwell. She confirmed that he came in with a fractured finger and bruised wrists, consistent with the application of excessive force. Wu pressed gently for Dr. Collins' professional opinion, and she explained that such injuries often came from severe twisting or blunt force. Gable attempted to undermine her testimony by suggesting that Caldwell could have been injured earlier or in a different altercation, but Dr. Collins held firm, stating that the bruising patterns were fresh and specifically indicative of handcuffs applied with significant pressure. Jessica noted just a flush creeping up Officer Lawson's neck. Denton looked equally disgruntled. Gable was clearly out of his depth, incapable of presenting a solid defense. Then, as if reading each other's minds, both officers stood. Lawson leaned over the defense table, whispering something to Gable. The young attorney looked startled, but he nodded and quickly requested to approach the bench for a private conference. The moment they arrived before her, Jessica steeled herself. "What is it, Mr. Gable?" "Your Honor," he said, swallowing visibly. "The defendants, they're requesting a brief continuance. They claim there is additional evidence that needs to be reviewed." Jessica glanced at Lawson and Denton, who both refused to meet her eyes. She could sense they were stalling, searching for any lifeline, any trick to derail the testimony that was swiftly painting them as guilty of racial harassment. "I see. You want more time to produce this additional evidence. Have you notified the plaintiff's counsel?" "No, Your Honor," Gable replied, his voice strained. "Denied," Jessica said firmly. "We will not grant a continuance without a compelling reason. Return to your table, Mr. Gable, and proceed." Lawson's jaw clenched, and Denton's hand momentarily fisted. They returned to their seats, seething. Jessica watched them carefully. Something in their eyes spoke of rage, barely contained. As the day's proceedings came to a close, Jessica rapped her gavel down to signal a recess until following morning. She gave Lawson and Denton one final pointed look, silently warning them that she would not be intimidated. But as she walked back to her chambers, an uneasy feeling churned in her gut. People like Lawson and Denton didn't just give up, especially when cornered. Her instincts told her that tomorrow could bring something far more disruptive, and she had no idea how violent it might become. That evening, Jessica decided to unwind by cooking herself dinner at home. The headlines had already begun to circulate online. Memphis officers in hot seat over civil rights lawsuit, and Judge Robertson presides over tense court case. She scrolled through social media, her eyes landing on a flurry of comments. Some were supportive, but others were disturbingly hateful. Anonymous users hurled insults about her being a so-called judge, accusing her of lacking respect for good cops. Worse still, some accused her of being a traitor. She tried not to internalize it. This was part of the job, an ugly side effect of challenging the status quo. Yet, the vitriol still stung. Her phone rang, and she recognized the number immediately. "Hey, Mom," Jessica answered, attempting a cheerful tone. "Jessica, baby, I saw the news," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "This case is all over the internet. You're not in danger, are you?" Jessica sighed. "I'm fine, just some trolls online, you know how it is." "I do, but I also know those officers have connections," her mother said. "Please be careful. Maybe ask for some extra security." "It's okay, Mom. The courthouse has its own security procedures." "I'll be careful," Jessica reassured her, not wanting to worry her mother any further. They chatted a bit more about family matters before Jessica hung up. She couldn't shake off the nagging fear that her mother's concern might be warranted. Still, she had a trial to conduct, and the rule of law had to come first. That night, she tried to sleep but found herself plagued by restless dreams. She dreamed being pulled over by a faceless officer, whose voice echoed with hatred. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. After downing a glass of water, She managed to drift back into a fitful doze. By morning, the city outside her window seemed eerily calm. She dressed in her usual black robe, carefully pinning her hair up. The routine had become a kind of armor. By maintaining it, she reminded herself of her duty and her role. Arriving at the courthouse, she immediately noticed an increase in media presence. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. She had no intention of answering. She walked briskly inside, escorted by a court officer. The day's proceedings began promptly at 9 a.m. On the schedule was more witness testimony, this time from a bystander who claimed to have recorded part of Caldwell's encounter on their phone. Jessica read over the affidavit. Apparently, the phone video showed Lawson shouting at Caldwell, though the footage was shaky and partly obstructed. Still, it might prove damning for the defense. As Jessica took her seat on the bench, she caught Lawson's glare from across the room. The hate emanating from him was palpable. Denton, on the other hand, looked almost panicked. Their attorney, Gable, attempted to mask his own anxiety, but his nervous fidgeting was evident. Unease, masked by a forced display of confidence, hung in the air. None of them knew that, in just a short span of time, a single moment of catastrophic disrespect, a violent act, would alter their fates forever. Jessica's hands tightened on the edge of the bench as she braced herself, resolving that no matter what happened, she would not be bullied. The storm was coming, and it was only a matter of time before the lightning struck. The morning session began smoothly enough. The bystander, a young man named Andrew Griggs, took the stand. Soft-spoken but resolute, he recounted how he had been walking home from a friend's house when he noticed Caldwell being pulled over. He heard raised voices and saw an officer forcibly pull Caldwell from his car. "I started recording with my phone," Griggs explained, glancing nervously at the officers. "I thought, after everything in the news, maybe I should record, but I was too far away to get it all. The video is kind of shaky." Veronica Wu then played the recording on a small screen for the court. It showed the tail end of Caldwell's encounter, the officers hovering over him, Caldwell's hands behind his back, his voice muffled but evidently in distress. One phrase stood out clearly. Lawson's voice barked, "Why don't you stay in your own neighborhood?" An audible gasp spread through the courtroom. Jessica maintained her composure, though inside she felt a surge of anger. She cast a glance at Officer Lawson, whose face had turned a deep shade of crimson. Denton looked down at the table, as if hoping the floor would swallow him. Before Gable could attempt damage control, Jessica asked Griggs a few clarifying questions. He admitted he hadn't seen the initial stop, nor had he witnessed the entire interaction, yet even this fragment of evidence painted a devastating picture of bias. At the defense table, tension rose like a simmering cauldron. Officer Lawson leaned over and whispered something to Officer Denton, who nodded grimly. Their eyes flicked back to the bench, locking with Jessica's in a look that spoke volumes. They blamed her. The cross-examination was brief. Gable tried to suggest that the video was incomplete and could be misinterpreted, but the damage was done. Once Griggs stepped down, the sense that the defense was in peril hung heavy in the air. As lunch approached, Jessica wrapped up the morning session. She knew the case was building a strong foundation for Caldwell's claims. She also knew that men like Lawson, accustomed to unquestioned authority, didn't handle public shaming well. Court officers let everyone out for break. Jessica lingered a moment on the bench, organizing her papers as the gallery emptied. That was when she noticed, out of the corner of her eye, Officer Lawson lingering as well. He exchanged a few words with Denton before striding purposefully toward the exit. His movements were controlled, but his body language screamed aggression. The bailiff escorted Jessica to her chambers. She tried to focus on the upcoming afternoon session, but her thoughts kept drifting to the ways this case was unraveling. These officers' carefully constructed web of intimidation was being exposed in court, and she was eroding their shield of impunity. She had no idea just how personal and immediate the backlash would become. Before the day was over, the two officers would take a step so reckless, so brazen, that it would shock everyone who witnessed it. In the aftermath, there would be no hiding from the consequences. After lunch, the atmosphere in Courtroom 7 felt even more charged. Word of the incriminating video had spread, and the press gallery was overflowing. Court officers struggled to maintain order as people jockeyed for seats. Jessica took the bench, scanning the room. She noticed that Caldwell appeared more relaxed, possibly encouraged by the evidence introduced that morning. Veronica Wu wore a confident expression. While Gable flipped through his files, his face set in desperation. Lawson and Denton, however, seemed coiled like snakes. Their aggression radiated from them, and Jessica found herself mentally bracing for any outburst. Court is now in session, the bailiff declared, and the room quieted. Wu called her next witness, a police officer who had worked alongside Lawson and Denton in the past, but was not directly involved in Caldwell's incident. This witness, Officer DeAndre Walters, had been subpoenaed to speak about department policies and any patterns of misconduct. Walters walked to the stand with a slow, deliberate gait. His uniform was crisp, and his posture screamed professionalism, but there was a haunted look in his eyes. Officer Walters, Wu began, "Can you state your relationship with Officers Lawson and Denton?" Walters swallowed, his atoms apple-bobbing visibly. I've been on patrols with them. I've done backup. We joined the force around the same time. Wu nodded. During your time with them, did you witness or hear about any racially charged remarks or questionable actions directed towards citizens of color? A tense pause held the courtroom in a vice. Walters glanced at Lawson and Denton, both glaring daggers at him. Finally, he nodded. Yes, I've heard remarks, jokes at the station, comments on patrol. Wu pressed gently. Could you be more specific? Walters inhaled. They've used slurs before. They'd say things like, "We need to clean up these streets." And they didn't just mean crime. They were talking about certain neighborhoods with predominantly black residents. And I've seen them pull over black drivers for no reason. They'd brag about it later. A collective hush fell over the room. Even Jessica's grip on her gavel tightened. This was direct testimony from a fellow officer, a piece of the puzzle that could blow the defense wide open. Gable moved to cross-examine, desperately trying to paint Walters as a disgruntled colleague, seeking revenge for personal reasons. Walters denied any vendetta. He simply stated, "I'm telling the truth. This has weighed on me for a long time." After Officer Walters stepped down, Jessica could almost feel the heat rising from the defendant's table. Lawson was livid, leaning forward in his seat, the veins in his neck bulging. Denton appeared pale, his eyes darting around, sensing the tension. Jessica decided to call for a recess before final arguments. She stood, her black robe swaying, and took a step toward the exit. That's when it happened. Lawson, in one swift motion, rose from his seat. He was already unholstering something. Not his gun, but his phone, and appeared to wave it at Jessica, shouting something inaudible over the sudden commotion. A second later, Denton tried to restrain him, or so it seemed, but all spiraled too fast. The bailiff moved to intervene, and a small crowd of spectators rushed forward in confusion. Jessica felt a surge of alarm as her mind raced. She realized Lawson was pushing past a barrier, stepping right up to the judge's bench. Time seemed to slow. She had seconds to react. The next moment, everything would change, sending shock waves through the courthouse and setting the stage for a dramatic reckoning that none of them would ever forget. Pandemonium erupted as Officer Lawson managed to breach the short wooden barrier, separating the court participants from the gallery. Denton, seemingly caught between loyalty and self-preservation, half-heartedly tried to pull him back, but Lawson shrugged him off with a violent jerk. Jessica stood frozen for a split second. She had never seen an officer behave so blatantly unhinged in her courtroom. Her gavel clattered from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. The bailiff lunged forward, yelling, "Stand down, officer! Stand down!" But Lawson, face contorted with rage, directed his fury at Jessica. "You think you can ruin me?" he snarled, his voice thick with hatred. Without warning, he raised his hand and delivered a backhand slap across Jessica's cheek. In that instant, the world seemed to stop. Gasps filled the room, and a wave of shock and indignation rippled outward. The force of the blow was enough to send Jessica reeling backward a step. Her vision blurred momentarily, and her cheek throbbed for a heartbeat. No one moved. Then, everything happened at once. The bailiff tackled Lawson to the ground. Denton stumbled backward in horror. Gable dropped his files, eyes wide with disbelief. Several onlookers screamed and cameras flashed, capturing the unimaginable scene. A police officer striking a sitting judge in open court. Jessica steadied herself, her hand instinctively going to her burning cheek. Her mind raced. She tasted blood where the inside of her lip had been cut by her own teeth. Shock quickly gave way to a tempest of emotions, anger, outrage, and a fierce resolve that flared in her chest. Officer Lawson was pinned on the floor, the bailiff yanking his hands behind his back. A ring of onlookers formed around them. Denton stared at the sight, paralyzed. Jessica's eyes, still burning from the assault, snapped to Denton. "Arrest him," she heard herself say, her voice trembling with fury. Now the bailiff barked at Denton to surrender your weapon, the officer ordered. In a daze, Denton complied, and within seconds, both Lawson and Denton were disarmed. Chaos erupted as more court officers rushed in, fighting to regain control. Jessica struggled to keep her composure as she touched her cheek, feeling the swelling welt forming. Cameras continued to snap photos, capturing the raw shock in her eyes. She looked down at Lawson, now handcuffed and being dragged to his feet. The moment their gazes met, he snarled, "You will regret this." Jessica felt adrenaline thrum through her veins. She turned to the stunned crowd. "Court is recessed," she declared, her voice shaking but resolute. "Everyone out immediately." Her authority, reinforced by the horrifying spectacle, cleared the room. Outside, reporters clamored, but inside, the scene was a swirl of uniforms and stunned attorneys. No one knew exactly what to do, as this was an unprecedented breach of judicial decorum, an outright physical assault on a judge. Jessica took a shaky breath, tears threatening to well up, not from weakness, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. She had never experienced such raw hatred physically unleashed upon her in her role as a judge. Yet amid the shock, a fierce conviction settled in her heart. This was far from over, and she would see to it that justice was done, even if it meant bringing the full weight of the law down on those who believed themselves above it. In the minutes that followed the assault, Courtroom 7 be transformed into a flurry of official procedures. While Officer Lawson was being handcuffed and led away, Denton stood still as though unable to process what had just transpired. Other officers on duty carefully took his weapon and radio, following protocol. Judge Donovan Mitchell rushed into the courtroom, his eyes wide with alarm. His gaze landed on Jessica, whose cheek was visibly bruised. "My God, Jessica, are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She nodded gingerly, touching her swollen cheek. "I'm fine," she said, her voice quavering and betraying the shock still coursing through her. "But I want them both booked immediately." Mitchell ushered her toward her chambers, away from the chaotic scene. Several court employees stood in a tight cluster, eyes brimming with sympathy and horror. Paramedics were called, and a stern-faced EMT examined Jessica's cheek, declaring it a minor injury but offering to take her to the hospital if needed. She declined. All the while, she couldn't shake the echo of Lawson's hateful sneer and the sting of his hand against her face. The humiliation mingled with indignation. She had faced racism all her life, but never had it erupted like this in her chambers. Jessica sank into her chair. Judge Mitchell closed the door gently and exhaled. "I've never seen anything like that," he admitted, running a hand through his silver hair. "Lawson is being charged with assault. Denton, too, for brandishing a weapon in the courtroom, although he didn't strike you." "Good," Jessica muttered, her voice still tight with anger. "I want them both prosecuted to the fullest extent. This can't be swept under the rug." Mitchell nodded. "I agree. We'll be filing a full report. The DA's office will likely press multiple charges. As for the civil rights case, it'll continue, but obviously it's taken a turn none of us expected." She looked up, her eyes fierce. "I'll recuse myself if necessary, but they should face the consequences for what they did to Caldwell, and now to me." "Jessica, you don't have to decide that right now," Mitchell said gently. "Take time to recover. Let the system handle them." Jessica wanted to believe the system would still work, but a tiny voice inside her asked, would powerful forces move to protect these men? She had seen it happen before. Officers quietly reinstated, disciplinary files vanishing. But this time, the entire courthouse had seen the attack, and half of them had recorded it. If there was ever a case that demanded accountability, this was it. Outside her window, she could hear the muffled roar of reporters. She knew the story would dominate headlines across the country by nightfall. Racist cop strikes black female judge in court. Some corners of the internet would surely spin it, blaming her for inciting him. But the video footage left no room for lies. She had been assaulted in open court, and the truth was undeniable. Moments later, a quiet knock heralded the arrival of a courthouse security officer. Judge Robertson, he said respectfully, "We have Officer Lawson in a holding cell. Officer Denton as well. They're awaiting formal booking. The chief of police is on his way." Jessica's heart pounded. This was the beginning of the next chapter, one in which the officers who acted above the law would finally be forced to beg for mercy. And Jessica was determined to ensure there would be no escape from the karmic storm they had unleashed upon themselves. 2 hours later, the courthouse buzzed with an intensity that Jessica had rarely experienced. Security personnel, staff members, and the media moved in frantic waves, trying to piece together the day's shocking events. Jessica remained in her chambers, conferred with Judge Mitchell and a detective from Internal Affairs named Serena Houston, a woman with a tough, no-nonsense demeanor and a track record for holding officers accountable. Judge Robertson, Detective Houston, said, her sharp eyes scanning the paperwork on the desk, "I want to assure you that we're treating this with the utmost seriousness. We've collected footage from multiple angles. Witness statements are pouring in. Lawson's assault was blatant, and Denton's complicity won't be overlooked." Jessica forced herself to remain composed. "I appreciate that, Detective. I'm worried about the possibility of behind-the-scenes interference. Lawson and Denton might have allies." Houston didn't let her finish. "I know, but their actions are on camera and in front of dozens of witnesses, including other officers. If someone tries to bury this, they'll have a riot on their hands. The mayor's office has already issued a statement condemning the assault." A knock at the door. A court staffer poked her head in. "Judge Robertson, the chief of police is here." Jessica braced herself. Moments later, Chief Valerie Akin entered the chambers. She was a tall, imposing figure with a stern expression softened only by worry. She removed her hat, clasping it in her hands. "Your Honor," she began, "I came as soon as I heard." Jessica assessed the chief's expression. She looked genuinely appalled. "Chief Akins, thank you for coming. I take it you're aware of what happened." Akins nodded grimly. "Yes, I've already launched an internal investigation. Officers Lawson and Denton will be suspended without pay pending a disciplinary hearing in addition to the criminal charges they face." She paused, glancing at Jessica's bruised cheek. "I'm deeply sorry for what you went through." Jessica swallowed, determined not to let emotions choke her voice. "Thank you, Chief. This isn't just about me. It's about what they did to Rachel Foster and who knows how many others. This kind of behavior has no place in law enforcement." Chief Akins lowered her gaze. "We'll do everything in our power to see that justice is served. I give you my word." That vow hung in the air, comforting but fragile. Over the years, Jessica had grown wary of promises made by those in power. But looking into Akins' eyes, she saw a genuine resolve. Perhaps the city was at a turning point, forced to confront its long-standing issues with policing. When Chief Akins left, Detective Houston followed to oversee the formal booking procedures. Jessica was left in the room with Judge Mitchell, who placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes," he said softly, "but in this case, they're going to turn fast. I have a feeling these officers will find out real quick how lonely it is when they're on the other side of the law." Jessica nodded, her hand touching the welt on her cheek. "It's not just about my face, Dawn," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of emotions. "It's about every person of color they've insulted, harassed, hurt. If we let them go free now, we fail everyone." Judge Mitchell's gaze held sympathy. "They're not going anywhere. The system, for once, is stacked against them, and it's about time." Outside the chamber, the commotion continued. Jessica closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered what her mother had told her. You keep doing what's right. She intended to do exactly that. In just a few hours, those untouchable officers would be kneeling in front of a magistrate, begging for bail, their badges worthless. And that, Jessica thought grimly, was only the beginning of their reckoning. By late afternoon, the news cycle had exploded. Several major networks picked up the story, broadcasting the headline, "Racist cop strikes judge in open court. Arrests made." Cell phone videos from spectators showed the moment of impact. Jessica recoiling in shock, Lawson lunging in fury. It was a scandal unlike anything Memphis had seen in years. Meanwhile, Officer Lawson and Officer Denton found themselves in a cramped holding area, typically used for violent offenders. The irony was lost on no one. Each man sat on a small bench, their wrists still bearing faint marks from the handcuffs. They avoided eye contact. A thick tension lay between them like a smoldering coal. As the door swung open, Gable, their defense attorney, stepped in. His face was pale. "They're processing your bail hearing soon," he informed them in a hushed tone. "Both of you are looking at felony charges, assault on a public official, among others. This is very serious." Denton swallowed hard. "But we're cops," he whispered, as if that alone should shield them from accountability. They can and they will." Gable snapped, frustration edging his voice. "The entire city saw what happened. You struck a judge for God's sake." Lawson sneered. "She baited us," he insisted, refusing to relinquish his arrogance. "All this talk of racism. She pushed and pushed, trying to ruin us. She's a racist one, acting like we're the villains." Gable stared at him, aghast. "Are you hearing yourself? Everyone saw you attack her. There's no excuse. If you have any hope, you need to cooperate. Show remorse." Lawson fell silent, his jaw clenching. He might have recognized the precariousness of his situation, but pride and anger still burned in his eyes. Denton, however, looked utterly defeated, his shoulders sagging. He knew that his life, as he knew it, might be over. When the door opened again, two uniformed officers entered, one giving a curt nod to Gable. "Time to go," he said, motioning for Lawson and Denton to stand. The men were escorted down a stark hallway into a small courtroom used for bail hearings. Inside, a magistrate, a stern-faced woman with reading glasses, sat at a desk. She glanced over the case file, lips pursed. Jessica was not present, which was standard procedure for a separate judge or magistrate to oversee bail in cases involving an attack on a sitting judge. The charges, read aloud, were damning. Assault with intent to commit bodily harm, assault on a judge, contempt of court, and potential hate crime enhancements. The list went on, each word slicing away at the officer's once untouchable status. Gable tried to argue for reasonable bail, but Lawson glowered, arms crossed. Denton glanced around a nearly empty room, eyes flicking with dread. After hearing the nature of the offense and noting the flight risk and danger to the community, the magistrate set a high bail, higher than either man was prepared to pay on the spot. At the mention of the figure, Lawson's defiance finally cracked. He turned to Gable with pleading eyes. "You got to help me," he hissed. "I don't have that kind of money." Gable grimaced. "I can only do so much. You both might have to wait in jail until your hearing." In that moment, the look on Lawson's face was nothing short of panic. Denton's lips moved in a silent prayer. The arrogant smirk they'd worn earlier vanished entirely, replaced by raw fear. For years, these men had held power. Now, they felt the cold steel of the system they'd so often abused closing around them. They were about to understand how swiftly justice could move when the tide of public outrage was behind it. For the first time, they realized they might just lose everything, all because they had chosen to assault the wrong black woman, a judge whose resolve was stronger than their sense of impunity. In the week that followed, Jessica took an approved leave of absence at Judge Mitchell's urging. The courthouse was flooded with media requests, and officials deemed it prudent for her safety and well-being to step away temporarily. Still, she kept close tabs on the unfolding legal drama surrounding Lawson and Denton. The men denied lower bail and remained in custody. Investigations piled up against them. Internal Affairs launched a full probe, unearthing complaints from citizens who had never dared speak up. The district attorney's office prepared a robust prosecution, citing multiple instances of excessive force and racially biased policing. James Caldwell's civil case, now bolstered by an avalanche of evidence, hurtled forward. Veronica Wu, triumphant but cautious, reached out to Jessica with updates. Caldwell's story had been validated in the most unexpected way. National civil rights organizations began offering their support, framing Caldwell's ordeal as part of a broader campaign to hold law enforcement accountable. Meanwhile, Jessica healed. The physical bruise on her cheek faded to a faint mark, but the emotional imprint lingered. She spent time with her mother, who fussed over her like she was still a child. She also granted a single interview to a local paper, emphasizing that what happened in that courtroom wasn't just about one judge or two officers. It was about a systemic reckoning that had been a long time coming. On the 8th day after the assault, Jessica received word that Lawson and Denton had agreed to a plea deal, though details were still being hammered out. Rumor had it that both officers, terrified by the prospect of a jury trial and a maximum sentence, were prepared to beg for leniency. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea as she read the latest court reports. An unexpected pang of pity tugged at her heart. These men had thrown their lives away through hatred and arrogance. But pity didn't override justice. They had caused too much harm. A day later, Jessica received a formal request from the court. Lawson and Denton, now represented by a more senior defense attorney, wanted to make a statement of contrition before sentencing. Jessica, having resumed her judicial duties but not presiding over their case, was invited to witness it if she so chose. She arrived at the smaller annex courtroom in the late afternoon, stepping in quietly. A hush fell as she took a seat. The presiding judge nodded in acknowledgement. Officer Ronald Denton. Officer Denton stood first. Gone was the tough swagger. He looked thin and pale, his uniform replaced by a plain county jumpsuit. His voice cracked as he read from a sheet of paper, apologizing to Jessica, to Rachel Foster, and to the city. He admitted he had allowed racial biases and peer pressure to corrupt his sense of duty. When he finished, the judge signaled for Lawson to speak. Officer Peter Lawson stood, eyes bloodshot. His once cocky demeanor had been reduced to trembling hands. I want to apologize, he stammered. I made a mistake. I was angry. I felt persecuted. I don't know what came over me. I was wrong to strike Judge Robertson. He faltered, swallowing hard. I asked the court for mercy. In that moment, Jessica remained silent, offering neither condemnation nor forgiveness. She simply observed the two men, who had once held themselves above the law. They were now reduced to pleading for leniency, their fate resting in the very system they had once exploited. The presiding judge passed sentence: time in state prison for assault and civil rights violations, plus a permanent ban from law enforcement. It was a landmark ruling, sending a decisive message. Lawson and Denton were led away in handcuffs, heads bowed, no longer towering figures of authority, but humble defenders. Outside the courthouse, Jessica breathed in the crisp air. This was not the end of racism, nor did it magically rectify all injustices, but was a small, powerful victory, a demonstration that even those wearing badges could be held accountable, especially when their victims and a fearless judge refused to be silenced. She glanced up at the sun setting over Memphis, feeling a cautious hope. People had united around James Caldwell's case. Journalists had brought the truth to light, and the legal system had delivered an unambiguous verdict. Perhaps, she thought, this was how change began. One battle, one courtroom, one act of justice at a time. In the wake of these events, Officer Lawson and Officer Denton found themselves stripped of their badges, their pride, and their freedom. Judge Jessica Robertson's courage in the face of blatant racism became a beacon of hope, not only for Rachel Foster, but for countless others who yearned for a fairer, safer community. Though the path to justice was fraught with danger and hostility, the outcome was an unmistakable stand against hate and abuse of power. If this story moved you, if it sparked anger, empathy, or inspiration, don't let it end here. Share it with your friends and family. Let it serve as a rallying cry that injustice cannot be allowed to thrive. Like this video. subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to join us in shedding light on stories of hope, resilience, and change. Together, we can keep the conversation alive and push for a world where justice truly prevails.